The laughter started before the human vessel even finished its approach. 400 species had gathered at the Galactic Assembly Station to witness humanity's formal introduction to interstellar civilization. Every race brought fleets to demonstrate their power. The Corvan arrived with 300 warships. The Melisari deployed 1,000 drone carriers. The Centauri hegemony positioned their flagship, a 20-kilometer behemoth of metal and fury, at the center of the welcoming formation. And then the humans appeared. One ship, a single vessel barely 2 kilometers long, emerged from hyperspace and drifted toward the station. Its hull was scarred and pitted, marked by countless battles that left permanent wounds in the metal. No gleaming ceremonial craft, no show of strength, just one tired-looking ship called the Persistence. Admiral Gora of the Militant Confederation pressed his massive claws together in what passed for amusement among his kind. His translator converted his rumbling laugh for all to hear. "One ship," he announced across the open channel. "The humans send one ship to greet the galaxy. Perhaps they are as foolish as they are young." Agreement rippled through the assembled representatives. Species that had warred for millennia found common ground in their disbelief. Was this an insult, an embarrassing display of poverty, or simply the ignorance of a primitive species that did not understand galactic customs? Ambassador Ryla of the Centauri watched the human vessel with her compound eyes narrowed. She had studied the preliminary reports on humanity. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 60 years ago. They came from a single planet in an unremarkable solar system. By all measures, they should have been insignificant. Yet something about the Persistence troubled her. The scars on its hull were not random damage. They formed patterns, evidence of battles survived and lessons learned. This ship had fought before and it had won. The human delegation arrived at the station through a standard docking port. Captain Amara Webb led her honor guard of 6 soldiers onto the main concourse. She was unremarkable by galactic standards. No natural armor, no venomous spines, no psychic abilities, just a baseline human with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much. The welcoming committee surrounded her immediately. Translators worked overtime as representatives demanded explanations. "Why only one ship?" asked a Melisari diplomat, her wings buzzing with agitation. "Is this meant as disrespect?" growled a Corvan warrior. "Do humans not understand the significance of this ceremony?" Admiral Gora pushed forward, towering over the human captain by nearly 2 meters. Captain Webb looked up at the assembled aliens without flinching. She had faced worse. "One ship is enough," she said simply. More laughter, more dismissal. The representatives began to turn away, already composing reports about humanity's disappointing entrance onto the galactic stage. Then the alarms began. Every warning system on the station activated simultaneously. Red lights painted the observation decks in the color of emergency. Sensor operators screamed readings that made no sense, thousands of contacts emerging from subspace in the outer system. Ambassador Ryla reached her command console first. What she saw made her blood run cold. The Ravager swarm had arrived. 4,000 bioships poured into real space like a plague given form. Each vessel was a living nightmare of chitin and acid, engineered by evolution for a single purpose: consumption. The Ravagers had destroyed 17 civilizations. They did not negotiate, they did not stop, they fed. Panic erupted across the station. The assembled fleets had been positioned for ceremony, not combat. Half-ran skeleton crews, many ambassadors had brought diplomatic yachts with minimal weapons. Against 4,000 Ravager bioships, they faced annihilation. Admiral Gora roared orders at his flagship. The Corvan warships powered their weapons, the Melisari scrambled their drones, but the tactical calculations were brutal. They were outnumbered 15-1 against an enemy that had never been defeated. Through it all, Captain Webb remained calm. She walked to the nearest communication console with the same unhurried pace she had used entering the station. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "All vessels, this is the human ship Persistence. We recommend you hold position and protect the station. We will handle the swarm." Silence fell, then laughter, nervous, disbelieving, desperate. "You," Admiral Gora snarled, "one ship against 4,000, human, this is not the time for jokes." "I am not joking." The Persistence had already begun to move. Through the observation windows, the watching aliens saw the small human vessel accelerating toward the approaching nightmare, one ship against an endless tide of death. Ambassador Ryla watched with growing unease. She had seen something in Captain Webb's eyes, not fear, not madness, but certainty. The human knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. "What are they doing?" someone whispered. Dying Admiral Gora replied, "Foolish, brave, and utterly." He stopped. The persistence had begun to change. Panels along the hull slid away, hidden weapon systems emerged from concealed ports. The ship that had seemed small and tired now bristled with firepower that made the watching admirals fall silent. Sensors detected energy readings that should have been impossible for a vessel that size. "What is that?" Ryla breathed. No one answered, no one knew. The Ravager swarm closed the distance. The Persistence flew to meet them alone, and the galaxy held its breath, about to learn why humanity had sent only one ship. Because one was all they needed. 40 years ago, Earth had burned. Captain Amara Webb remembered. She had been 7 years old when the first Ravager ships descended through the atmosphere. Her mother had carried her into the bunkers beneath their city while the sky turned orange with fire. The screams of the dying had haunted her dreams ever since. Now she stood on the bridge of the Persistence, watching the swarm approach on her tactical display, and she felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Primary weapons to full power," she ordered, signal broadcast ready. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. Every human aboard understood what was at stake and what they were about to reveal. Behind them, the Galactic Assembly Station erupted in chaos. Ambassador Ryla coordinated desperate attempts to organize the scattered fleets. Admiral Gora bellowed commands that his own officers barely heard over the panic. The Melisari had begun evacuation procedures. The Corvan were arguing about retreat vectors. None of them understood, not yet. The Persistence opened a channel to the swarm. What it broadcast was not a message, it was a memory. Specifically, the recorded distress calls of Ravager bioships from 40 years ago, the sounds of their kind dying in the atmosphere of Earth, the psychic echoes of defeat that every Ravager carried in their genetic memory. The effect was immediate. 4,000 bioships slowed their approach. For the first time in recorded history, the Ravager swarm hesitated. They remembered this signal, they remembered this enemy, they remembered the small blue world that had refused to die. On the assembly station, Admiral Gora stared at his sensor displays in disbelief. They stopped. The Ravagers stopped. How is this possible? Ambassador Ryla worked her console frantically, analyzing the human transmission. When she understood what she was hearing, her compound eyes widened. That signal, those are Ravager death screams. The humans are broadcasting Ravager death screams. From where? Gora demanded. From Earth. 40 years ago, the swarm invaded humanity's homeworld. Ryla's voice trembled. According to these readings, the humans killed them. They killed enough Ravagers that the survivors carry the trauma in their very DNA. Captain Webb opened a channel to the assembly. Her voice remained steady, almost casual. 40 years ago, the Ravagers found our world. We had no allies. We had no advanced technology. We had only ourselves and our refusal to surrender. The tactical display showed the swarm reforming, overcoming their initial shock. Fear alone would not stop them, but it had bought precious seconds. They expected easy prey, Webb continued. They learned otherwise. Footage appeared on every screen in the assembly, images from Earth's invasion. Human cities burning, yes, but human soldiers fighting back with nuclear weapons, kinetic bombardments, and desperate courage. Ravager ships crashing into oceans and mountains. Bioforms melting under concentrated fire. The swarm had come to consume humanity. Instead, they had found a species that would rather burn their own world than submit. "We lost billions," Webb said quietly. "We nearly lost everything, but we survived, and we spent 40 years preparing for them to return." The Persistence finished charging its primary weapon. Along the ship's spine, energy readings spiked beyond anything in galactic databases. Ambassador Ryla's instruments detected gravitational anomalies that should not exist. "What is that weapon?" she whispered. The swarm had recovered from their hesitation. Thousands of bioships accelerated toward the lone human vessel. Their fear was fatting, their hunger remained. One ship could not stop them all. Captain Webb watched them come. Humanity learned something during the invasion, she said. We learned that the Ravagers fear very few things. They do not fear death, they do not fear pain, but they do fear one thing: they fear meeting something that will not break. The primary weapon fired. There was no beam, no projectile. Space itself rippled outward from the Persistence in a wave of distorted gravity. Where that wave touched Ravager ships, they collapsed inward, their organic hulls compressed, crushed by forces that turned matter into nothing. 300 bioships ceased to exist in a single second. Silence fell across the assembly. Species that had warred for 10,000 years stared at the same screens, united in shock. Admiral Gora's tactical officer spoke in a shaking voice. Artificial singularities, they are creating artificial black holes. The weapon fired again. Another 200 Ravagers vanished. The swarm scattered, spreading wide to minimize losses, but they did not retreat. They could not. Their hunger drove them forward. Smaller bioships accelerated toward the Persistence, sacrificing themselves to close the distance. The singularity weapon was devastating but slow. Between shots, the enemy advanced. Captain Webb nodded slowly. Good, they need a reminder of what we can do when pushed. The Persistence revealed its secondary armaments. Railguns fired tungsten rounds at a fraction of lightspeed, point defense lasers carved through organic hulls, missile bays unleashed antimatter warheads. One ship fought like a cornered predator, savage, relentless, and utterly without mercy. Ambassador Ryla watched the battle unfold. One ship, she breathed, one ship against thousands, and they are winning. Not for long, the swarm adapted, surrounding the Persistence from every angle. Bioships crashed against its hull, acid burned through armor. The human vessel was taking damage. But it was not done, not yet. And somewhere in the outer system, something far worse was waking up. The Persistence bled fire into the void. Sections of the hull had been torn open by Ravager boarding tendrils. Atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. The ship listed slightly as damaged. Thrusters struggled to compensate. 3,000 bioships still surrounded the human vessel, and more kept coming. But the Persistence kept fighting. Railgun batteries thundered in sequence, punching through organic hulls with tungsten rounds. Point defense lasers swept across approaching swarms of smaller organisms. The singularity weapon charged and fired, erasing dozens of enemies with each pulse. Admiral Gora stood frozen at his command station, watching sensor data he could not comprehend. The human ship had destroyed over 1,000 Ravagers, more than any fleet in galactic history had managed against the swarm. One vessel, one crew, fighting alone against impossible odds. Why are they doing this? He muttered. Ambassador Ryla answered without looking away from her display. They are buying us time, time to organize, time to fight, time we did not earn. The word struck Gora like a physical blow. He had laughed at humanity's single ship. He had called them foolish and weak. Now that same ship was dying to protect species that had mocked them. His claws tightened on his console. All Confederation vessels, power weapons, prepare to engage. His tactical officer stared at him. Admiral, our odds against the remaining swarm. I know the odds. Gora's voice carried a weight it had not held before. But I will not stand here and watch one ship fight our battle, not anymore. Across the assembly station, the same realization was spreading. The Centauri fleet powered their plasma batteries, the Melisari launched their drone swarms, even the diplomatic yachts armed whatever weapons they carried. Ambassador Ryla broadcast on all frequencies. All vessels form on the human ship, they stand alone because we let them, that ends now. The combined fleet began to move. On the Persistence, Captain Webb allowed herself a small smile. The aliens were finally understanding. Humanity had not come to impress them with numbers, they had come to show them what courage looked like. Captain, her tactical officer reported. The assembly fleet is advancing to support us. About time, Webb checked her damage readouts. The ship was holding together but barely. They had maybe 30 minutes of combat effectiveness left. Focus fire on the larger bioforms, let the smaller ones come to us. The swarm recognized the threat of the approaching fleet. Bioships peeled away from the Persistence to engage the new enemies. The pressure on the human vessel eased slightly. Then the sensors screamed a new warning. Something massive was emerging from hyperspace behind the swarm, something that dwarfed even the largest bioships. A vessel the size of a small moon, ancient and terrible, covered in chitin armor that had survived millennia of warfare. The Hive Queen had arrived. Every Ravager in the system oriented toward their mother, their coordination sharpened, their attacks became more focused. The Queen's presence gave them purpose beyond hunger. Now they fought with intelligence. Her voice broadcast across all frequencies, not words, but meaning forced directly into minds. The death screams of 17 consumed civilizations woven into a message of absolute hatred. The small ONES who burned, we remember your world, we remember your defiance, we have WAITED 40 years to finish what we began. The message targeted humanity specifically. The Queen remembered Earth, she remembered the humiliation of retreat. She had come personally to ensure the species that had wounded her kind would finally be erased. Captain Webb felt the psychic pressure like ice against her skull. Around her, crew members winced and grabbed their heads. The Queen's hatred was a weapon in itself. But Webb had grown up in the bunkers beneath burning cities. She had breathed the ash of her dead. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. "All hands," she announced, her voice cutting through the psychic assault. "We knew she would come, we planned for this. Everything we have done, every battle, every sacrifice has led to right now." She opened a channel to the assembly fleet. "All vessels, continue engaging the swarm, keep them occupied, the Queen is ours." Admiral Gora roared back, "Human, you cannot fight that thing alone, your ship is already damaged." "We are not going to fight her, Admiral." The Persistence changed course. Instead of retreating or defending, it accelerated directly toward the Hive Queen. The wounded ship pushed its damaged engines beyond safe limits, racing toward the monster that had come to kill them. "We are going to kill her." Ambassador Ryla intercepted encrypted human communications. What she decoded made her freeze. The Persistence was not just a warship. It carried something, a weapon designed for exactly this scenario. The humans had known the Queen would come. They had built this ship specifically to destroy her. They had always planned to die doing it. "No," Ryla whispered, "they cannot." The Persistence flew into the shadow of the Hive Queen, one small ship against a living moon. And the galaxy watched, about to learn the true price of human determination. The Hive Queen sensed the human ship approaching and felt something she had not experienced in 10,000 years: uncertainty. This tiny vessel had killed more of her children than any enemy in living memory. Its weapons defied her understanding. Its crew refused to break under her psychic assault, and now it flew directly toward her, not fleeing, not defending, attacking. What did these creatures know that she did not? She unleashed her most devastating weapons. Spore clouds that dissolved metal erupted from ports along her body. Gravity lances designed to tear apart capital ships focused on the small target. Biomissiles filled with concentrated acid launched in swarms. The Persistence flew through hell. Its armor melted and reformed. Human engineers had designed every plate to resist exactly these attacks. Sections of the hull were sacrificed to absorb damage meant for critical systems. The ship twisted and rolled through the gravity lances, its crew enduring forces that would have crushed lesser species. Captain Webb gripped her command chair as her ship shook around her. Blood ran from her nose, a burst vessel from the gravitational stress. She ignored it. "Distance to Queen. 40,000 kilometers and closing. Activate phase drive." Her crew exchanged glances. They knew what that order meant. The phase drive was experimental technology built for exactly one purpose. It had never been tested under combat conditions. It might tear the ship apart. None of them hesitated. The phase drive hummed to life. Reality bent around the Persistence. For a moment, the ship existed in two places at once, in normal space and somewhere else, somewhere between dimensions. Then it jumped. The Persistence did not impact the Hive Queen's surface. It passed through, phasing directly into the monster's body. chitin and organic matter offered no resistance to a vessel that was not entirely real. The ship materialized inside the Queen, surrounded by kilometers of living tissue. The Queen screamed. Her voice tore through the minds of every being in the system. Even Admiral Gora, light years away in the battle against the swarm, felt her agony and confusion. Something was inside her, something was where nothing should be. Captain Webb looked through the viewports at walls of pulsing flesh. The Queen's internal systems were already responding, biodefenses converging from every direction. They had seconds, maybe less. All hands, she said quietly, evacuate to the survival pod, that is an order. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Dara Cole, turned to face her. Captain. Dara, someone has to tell them what happened here, someone has to make sure they remember. Webb smiled, a real smile, tired but peaceful. Go live, that is your mission now. Cole wanted to argue, wanted to stay, wanted to die alongside the captain who had led them through 40 years of preparation, but she understood. The story mattered, the legacy mattered. Yes, Captain, she gathered the remaining crew, 27 survivors, and led them to the hardened compartment at the ship's core, the pod sealed behind them. Webb was alone on the bridge. The Queen's defenses reached the ship, tendrils and acids began tearing at the hull. In minutes, the Persistence would be destroyed, but minutes was all Webb needed. She opened the final command sequence. Deep in the ship's core, behind layers of shielding that had protected it through every battle, a device activated. The humans called it the Prometheus device, named for the god who brought fire to mankind. Inside containment fields that were now failing, hydrogen compressed beyond natural limits. A miniature star waited to be born. For Earth, Webb whispered, for everyone who died, for everyone who will live. She thought of her mother, carrying her into the bunkers. She thought of the billions who had burned so that humanity could survive. She thought of the children who would grow up in a galaxy without the Ravager threat. She pressed the final button. Ignition. Inside the Hive Queen, a new sun was born. The light that erupted was beyond description. Stellar fire bloomed in the cold void. The Queen's moon-sized body became plasma, then ash, then nothing. 10,000 years of accumulated malice ended in an instant of absolute destruction. The shockwave rippled outward. The remaining swarm ships felt their mother's death as their own. Biological bonds that connected them to the Queen shattered. Coordination failed. Unity dissolved. They screamed in voices that carried across light years. Ambassador Ryla watched the readings in stunned silence. Where the Hive Queen had been, there was only expanding gas and radiation. The Persistence was gone. Captain Webb was gone. 27 humans in a survival pod drifted at the edge of the devastation. But the Queen was dead. The species that had consumed 17 civilizations, the nightmare that had haunted the galaxy for millennia, had been killed by one ship and one crew who refused to let others suffer what they had survived. Admiral Gora's voice broke through the silence. All ships, the swarm is disorganized, attack now, press them while they are broken. The combined fleet descended on their confused enemy. Without the Queen, the Ravagers could not coordinate. Without coordination, they could not adapt. Ship by ship, the swarm fell. And in the void where their mother had died, a small survival pod tumbled through the darkness, carrying the last witnesses to humanity's sacrifice. 3 days after the battle, a Centauri patrol vessel found them. The survival pod drifted at the edge of the debris field, its emergency beacon barely functioning. Inside, 27 humans waited, radiation-sick, battered, but alive. Lieutenant Dara Cole had kept them together through the darkness, rationing supplies and treating wounds with whatever medical equipment had survived. When the rescue ship's airlock opened, she was the first to step through. Ambassador Ryla was waiting. The Centauri diplomat had personally insisted on leading the search. She had watched the Persistence die. She had decoded the human communications. She understood, perhaps better than anyone except the survivors themselves, what humanity had sacrificed. Lieutenant Cole, Ryla's voice was soft. I am deeply sorry, your captain. She knew. Cole's eyes were red but dry. She had already mourned. She always knew, we all did, the Persistence was never meant to survive this mission. It was designed to deliver a weapon. We were designed to make sure someone remembered. The survivors were transferred to medical facilities on the assembly station. Doctors from a dozen species worked to heal radiation damage and treat injuries. The humans accepted the help with quiet gratitude. The galaxy, meanwhile, struggled to understand what it had witnessed. The Ravager swarm that had terrorized civilizations for millennia was broken. 4,000 bioships had been destroyed. The Hive Queen, an entity that predated most galactic governments, was dead, and all of it had been accomplished by one species that most had dismissed as primitive newcomers. The Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session. For the first time in its history, humanity would be given a seat at the table, not as a minor species to be evaluated, but as equals who had earned their place in fire and sacrifice. Admiral Gora requested the honor of speaking first. The massive Corvan warrior stood before the assembled representatives, the same beings who had heard him laugh at humanity's single ship only days before. His voice carried no mockery now. "I was wrong," the words echoed through the chamber. "I looked at one ship and saw weakness. I heard their captain say one is enough, and I thought she was foolish. Now I understand what she meant." He turned to face the human section of the chamber, where Lieutenant Cole sat with her surviving crew. "Humans do not measure strength in numbers, they measure it in will. They sent one ship because one ship was all they needed, one chance, one choice, one refusal to surrender. They knew the Queen would come, they built a weapon to kill her, they knew they would die using it, and they came anyway." His claws pressed together in the Corvan gesture of highest respect. "I have commanded fleets of thousands, I have won battles that shaped empires, but I have never witnessed courage like what the Persistence showed. I was honored to fight alongside them. I will carry that honor until I die." Ambassador Ryla spoke next. She moved to the center of the chamber with a proposal. "I ask this assembly to construct a memorial at the coordinates where the Hive Queen fell, a station built around the words Captain Webb transmitted in her final moments. Let every species that passes through that space remember what humanity did for us." The vote was unanimous. 6 months later, the memorial station was completed. It orbited the spot where the Persistence had created its final sun, where Captain Amara Webb had traded her life for the galaxy's freedom. Carved into its hull in every known language were her words. "We came from a small world, we were alone in the dark. We survived because we refused to accept extinction. We send one ship because that is all we have ever needed, one chance, one choice, one refusal to surrender. Remember us not for the fire we brought, but for the darkness we held back." Lieutenant Cole attended the dedication ceremony. She had been promoted to captain, given command of a new ship called the Persistence II. Humanity was building a fleet now, but they had decided that there would always be a Persistence. The name meant too much to let it fade. After the ceremony, she stood on the observation deck looking out at the stars. A young Centauri approached, Ambassador Ryla's daughter, barely old enough to travel but already curious about the species that had changed everything. "Why?" the child asked. "Why did your people sacrifice so much for species you had never met?" Cole considered the question. She thought of Captain Webb, alone on the bridge in those final moments. She thought of Earth, the scars that remained from the first invasion, the bunkers where children had hidden while their world burned. She thought of the promise made by survivors that no one else would suffer what they had endured. "Because that is what humans do," she looked down at the child with a gentle smile. "We protect, we endure, we persist." The young Centauri tilted her head. "But you barely knew us, we laughed at your ship, why save us?" Cole turned back to the stars, to the void where her captain had died, where 27 survivors had drifted waiting for rescue, where one species had proven that courage matters more than numbers. "Because someone has to stand between the darkness and everyone else. Someone has to be willing to burn so others can live. Humanity learned that lesson the hard way, and we decided that no one else should have to." She placed her hand on the viewport. "We send one ship because one ship is a promise that we will never stop fighting, never stop protecting, never stop persisting." The stars shone back at her, cold and eternal, but a little less dark than they had been before.